Good evening, Rush Nation. How are we all doing? It is the DFS show. Your man Nick, my man Mark. Wow, wrong side. There we go. Gonna have to work on that one, Mark. How are we doing?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. Sorry, I was a bit distracted there, getting all the socials out there and stuff, so people know we're here.
Yeah. Week 1 is in the books. We will, of course, be talking about the FanTeam season-long contest again. How did week 1 go for you, Mark?
Pretty well. I'm in the money, like a lot of us are.
All right.
My team's is 183rd, my pod team, with 158 points. So yeah, not bad. I've got 3 teams in the money at the moment. Plenty of work to do, though, still with them. Still plenty of work to do. I mean, one thing we learned this week is how little we knew before the season started. It's all the things we thought would happen, they didn't.
Yeah, and I think what is worth remembering, Mark, is it's week 1. We've got to remember that. We've got to almost rein yourself in a little bit. We said this on previous pods. If someone doesn't perform in week 1, don't panic too much. He says that before we discuss our transfers a little bit later on in the pod. But there's things that will have happened this week that, that certain things moving forward, you'd expect certain players will perform on weeks where maybe they didn't and you were expecting that they would. I can't get my head around what Jacksonville are thinking. 14 mil for James Robinson seemed foolproof. That seemed a bargain. It seemed like I had a running back one for a fraction of the price, and I'm staring down the barrel of a gun, Mark, where he's potentially not actually going to be in my lineup again this week because I did not like what I saw at all from Jacksonville. And in all honesty, I don't like some of the matchups going forward either there. We'll get more into it as we go through our teams. But yeah, I think it's key not to panic too much because this is the NFL. Some weeks, guys that you own in fantasy don't perform. Some weeks they do. You can be that unlucky person that owns Raheem Mostert and someone else will own Mitchell, and you'll think, where has that come from? This is the kind of thing that happens in NFL fantasy, and just be patient. I would say you don't want to fall too far behind the pack, but again, think about why you've picked your team. Look at the schedule. Look at potential transfers you might want to make in weeks to come, even. But yeah, action-packed show coming. So we will be reviewing our week 1 scores, our week 1 performances for our pod teams that we revealed to you last week. We will also be looking ahead to week 2. Any changes on the horizon for us both in those teams. And we can still register for the contest, can't we, Mark?
Yeah, we can indeed. It's if you register now before Thursday for the Thursday night game, you start with 124 points. So definitely not too far behind, and you could definitely catch up, I think. The great thing about starting in game week 2 is you've seen the ownership for game week 1. Yeah. So that allows you to see things like Swift was like 0% owned, for example, things like that, etc. So yeah, it's I think it's definitely worth doing it. I think it may, in some respects, it may well be better for beginners to starting game week 2 because they've seen some scores already.
Yeah.
So they're not, yeah. And just going sort of reiterating a little bit of what you're saying. Players like Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams and Derrick Henry, they're not bad fantasy players after 1 week, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Calvin Ridley's not a bad fantasy player. So I just think you're absolutely right. Don't try and just change your whole team completely. I think, give it a couple more weeks, see how they are, and then sort of review it again. But yeah, these players will come back. I mean, Green Bay, I expect to have a very good week this week, but because they're at the Lions, and I don't think they're not bad players. These ones who didn't perform this week as we expected.
Yeah, I think, and we'll discuss it a bit more, Mark, as we do get to the transfers segment. But I think if you're going to make transfers, a couple of the ones that I have in mind, potential transfers I might make, I've still not fully made my mind up just yet. But any transfer I would make at this point would be for something I have seen, for example, the Jacksonville game against the Texans. We were all expecting James Robinson to be an RB1, certainly in week 1 against the lowly Texans. And they played them off the park. And James Robinson was scarcely involved. And it doesn't really get much easier for Jacksonville moving forward either. And I think a lot of us, me certainly, got hung up on the fact that Travis Etienne picked up the injury. It paved the way for James Robinson. Actually, was Travis Etienne drafted because there wasn't a massive role for James Robinson in the offense going forward? Jacksonville not going to be running the ball that much. It seems they're going to be playing from behind most weeks, which I think we knew anyway, in all fairness. But a transfer like that is probably where I would go because of what I've seen. You might not want to risk that happening for a second week in a row, and I can't blame you. But some of the players you mentioned, Mark, your Calvin Ridley's, your Derrick Henry's, these are fantasy players, proven fantasy players, and players that you would expect come the end of the season. They're going to be well up there on the scoring charts. So I think there's certain players you can absolutely be patient with because that is the nature of fantasy. And I think there's certain players where they fall into that risk category that there's a high reward, but it's a big risk if it doesn't come off. And if you don't get the high reward, you're getting quite a low floor from that risk as well, which is essentially what's happened this week with James Robinson.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, probably should have said I meant the premium players here, where your top players I wouldn't be too concerned about right now. The Robinson thing is it's such a surprise. It kind of, do you not make you think that basically the plan was Travis Etienne and nobody else?
Yeah.
And but I mean, on the plus side with that team, I actually thought Trevor Lawrence looked pretty good for his debut. I thought out of all of the rookie quarterbacks, he kind of looked to me like the most like an NFL quarterback, for want of a better phrase. I know he threw 3 picks, but for fantasy purposes,
god awful.
Yeah, well, yeah, but for fantasy, Peyton Manning had a fair few his first season as well. But for fantasy purposes, interceptions aren't the end of the world because they only cost you a point.
Yeah, in this format, and that's worth remembering. Before we do move on to our week 1 review, Mark, I think it's important just to remind the listeners that support for all 5 Yard Rush podcasts is brought to you by Manscaped. Manscaped are the best out there in men's below the waist grooming. They offer precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped recently launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0, all across Europe. Superb, Mark. We spoke about it in the past. If you're someone that does like to keep that area nice and trim, this is the tool for you. Do not risk anything. Don't neglect the area. Get yourself over to Manscaped. We've got a fantastic offer on. Using the code 5yard at manscaped.com, you will get 20% off and free worldwide shipping. That is code 5yard at manscaped.com. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped. You still have the t-shirt on, Mark, so you clearly trust Manscaped.
Well, I definitely trust the t-shirt on the pod.
It's superb. It is superb. Get yourself over to Manscaped. It's a great tool. And as I said, you don't want to be neglecting that area of all areas on the male body. Moving on then to our week 1 lineups, Mark. How did we do? I want to have a look at yours first, Mark. I want to see yours.
Let's have a look at this one then. Okay. So, I've got this so I can see it as well. There we go. The where am I? There we go. That's the one I want. So yeah. So my top scorer was a Kyla Murray, which isn't a massive surprise. He actually made the dream team as well. For those who don't know, if you look, you can actually click a button. I think it's on the leaderboard. It shows you the dream team each week, or for whatever contest you're in on FanTeam. It shows you the highest scoring team you could have built. In my lineup, I've got 2 players from that. I've got Joe Mixon at 3% was fantastic value. I think we talked about this last week. I actually took Eckler out and put Mixon in just for because of that matchup, and that paid off well. There's no real great surprises here, except Calvin really did disappoint. Cooper Kupp, we expected to do well, didn't we? It was with Matt Stafford. I think the 2 gamble plays were obviously Tyler Conklin and Kes Watkins. I was quite happy with Conklin. He was on the field for like 71% of the snaps. At the Minnesota, though, I was kind of expecting him to be like the 3rd receiver option, but as it turned out to be KJ Osborne, who we'll probably talk about a little bit later. And Kes Watkins he was on for 48% of the snaps. He's clearly like the fifth option in that offense. Do you reckon 5th? I think he would be. So yeah, but 5.3 at the value, the way he offers me the opportunity to pay it for the other players. I'm probably going to keep them both this week, to be perfectly honest, because I'm quite happy with how that looks.
Yeah.
I think I've got the wrong one on the screen, haven't I?
Well, I was just going to say, Matt, you're skipping ahead to the game week 2 lineups there with what's on the screen.
I don't believe it. This is the first live show, and these sort of things happen. We didn't have any of this last week, but we pre-recorded.
You're talking through it, Mark, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, wow, Mark has changed his team. He's gone against everything that he said. He's got Darren Waller in there at tight end. Christian McCaffrey seems to have dropped by the wayside. So that's what I was seeing. That was the game week 2 lineup there. We'll come to that shortly.
I won't get it back on the screen then, because we talked about it. My week 1 lineup. Okay, that's technical difficulties, clearly.
The slightly more prepared of the 2 of us has got a nice spangly lineup with all the points there for you to see. So I'm really pleased with my week 1 as well, Mark. Kyla Murray, top scoring quarterback on the week. I think we expected good things from Kyla Murray, but I don't know if we expected week 1 top scoring quarterback against a Tennessee Titans team that going into the season, we probably assumed that, they're going to be a playoff team again. But he looked absolutely electric. He was slinging the ball. He was running the ball. He looked in sync with his receivers, and there looked like there was some surprises as well, that some receivers that maybe I hadn't considered, because I thought they weren't a thing really in the Arizona offense. Like Christian Kirk was relatively cheap, and he was involved in a couple of scores. So yeah, it's I think Kyla Murray definitely won't be moving out of my team anytime soon. Reasonably happy with Diggs and Hopkins. Probably a little bit disappointed with Diggs, if I'm being honest, but I think I was quite disappointed with Buffalo in general. They just didn't look at the races, and I suppose you can attribute that to the Pittsburgh defense, because the Pittsburgh offense wasn't fantastic in itself. Marquez Callaway, I don't know what happened there. I mean, I think Winston only threw for, was it 140 yards?
Something like that.
Five touchdowns. I mean, Callaway, I think he was targeted twice, 3 times at most. Hauled 2 of them in. I'm really concerned about Callaway in my lineup, if I'm being honest. But at 12 million, I think if I move off him at this stage, I'm taking a chance moving on to someone at a similar price. And what I mean by that is I think he has an opportunity to bounce back this week and score better than that. That's what I'm hoping anyway. But I think if I move off him, who am I moving on to at that kind of bracket? Do I move on to a Rondale Moore? Do I move on to an Amon-Ra St. Brown? You know, there's obviously there is options there. Do I move on to a tight end? That would go against everything that I've said up to this point in the twin tight ends. You know, Zach Pascal's there at 10 million. Was that an outlier week for Zach Pascal? I know that they've not got much at receiver with T.Y. Hilton being out, but I think it's the problem with Callaway is at 12 million. I think if you move off him, you're moving on to another question mark, and it's week one, and it's worth remembering that. But yeah, I am disappointed in week one. Quez Watkins comes in with a 5.3. I can't really ask for much more than that. He's 7 million. He had a few targets, a couple of receptions. I wasn't expecting groundbreaking from him. I hope he's more involved in the offense going forward. But like you said, Mark, he's behind the two tight ends. You're looking at fifth option in the offense. He's someone in hindsight that I probably wouldn't have kept in my team had I known how much Baltimore were going to use Williams this week. I wish that's the route I'd have gone down now, looking back. And there's two of my lineups that I did go down that route. And there's two of my lineups that had Watkins. I told you this, Mark, offline last week, that two of my lineups had Watkins as an enabler. Two of them had Williams as an enabler.
Yeah.
There was justification for Watkins in this lineup because I felt that I was fairly strong at running back and I have a running quarterback, so I thought we'll go receiver. But yeah, it's that's one of those where I'm going to have a little think about it, because if Williams is involved again, 10, 15 touches in Baltimore's offense this weekend, then I'd strongly consider using a transfer, even though it's only going to free up 1 million. I can use it elsewhere. So yeah, Watkins on the bubble, but I'm not too disappointed week one because I wasn't really expecting much from him anyway. Darren Waller, I mean, wow. Darren Waller came as advertised. I watched the game this morning, Mark. I don't know if you've seen the game, but he 10 receptions, the most targeted player on his team by far. There's still nothing in that Oakland offense that makes me think that's going to change going forward. Ruggs, Edwards had a few receptions here and there, Hunter Renfrow, but it seemed like every time Derek Carr dropped back, he was looking for Darren Waller. He's essentially the wide receiver one there. We knew that going into this week. Absolutely buzzing that came off for me, and he's repaid me at 26.5 points. I'll take that every week. I'm not expecting a score from him every week, and I'm not expecting these numbers because at the end of the day, he is a tight end, but he is wide receiver one in Oakland. So I'm really pleased with that. Did that shock you, Mark? The Darren Waller? Or
so I think it was 19 targets. I think I saw in the end. I also wonder, like you say, about being a bit of an outlier. I also saw another stat, and I can't remember if it was at the end of the first half or the first quarter, but he'd only initially, whilst the Baltimore defense were fairly fit and healthy, they kept it down to one catch for quite a long time, and then they kind of got gassed because their offense couldn't stay on the field. And I'm just wondering if they come up against, not to say a tougher matchup because Baltimore's a top team, but if I think a lot about that game from what I've read sort of helped Waller. But like you say, nobody else had really taken over the mantle of wide receiver one there. So, I have to put my hand up and say, look, maybe he's going to be better than I thought. I to be honest with you, I did say my one criticism was I think he's a bit streaky and a bit boom or bust, which isn't so important in a format like this.
Yeah,
I think I think so. Just going back quickly about Callaway. I would say that in sort of regular weekly DFS, I think he might be a fantastic play this week because last week he was. They've got a decent secondary Green Bay, and they've got one of the best cornerbacks in the game. And I think the ownership will be right down on him. So just one of those really good plays, I think, for this week.
Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily put him a season long because I don't know. You say I don't know about consistency, but equally around there, who else you can pick? I mean, I've already the cat's slightly out of the bag on my game week 2 lineup. But I think there are other options around that price, but you're not going to you're going to save masses of money by doing so.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he has had a bit of a poor week 1, I think if you're, like you said, Mark, if you were playing a weekly DFS here, he'd be a prime kind of target where he's probably going to be lower owned. So in week 2, he becomes it becomes a bit of like a contrarian kind of play to what other people would go with. And I think that's another reason I'm just going to give him another week in the lineup. If I get another week like the first week, he'll be gone in week 3. But he's an underperforming week, I think, in the NFL always leads nicely into a week where you're expecting a bit of a bounce back. Fingers crossed that is the case. Like you said, despite the result, it's a tougher defense than what they're potentially coming up against this week in Carolina. Carolina looked pretty good against the Jets, but they didn't have it all their own way in that game. I would suspect Winston might be a little bit more confident in the ball out as well this week. So we'll see on that. The running backs, McCaffrey does what McCaffrey does. Not much needs saying there. James Robinson, I'm so disappointed with. Not even James Robinson, as a matter of fact, I'm so disappointed with Jacksonville. That said, Mark, if I was choosing this lineup again in week 1, not knowing what we know now, I still wouldn't have picked anyone different, I don't think, going into week 1. Certainly not at running back, because when I look at the other running backs of a similar price who scored well, the likes of Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift's there, so I don't think we expected 25 points from Jamal Williams. That is a bit of an outlier, I think. Melvin Gordon, again, Javonte Williams is there in the backfield. Were we expecting 20.8 points from Melvin Gordon? We know he's got that in his locker. There was a big touchdown run. When you look at Tyson Williams, I think at $6 million, I certainly wouldn't have had him as my running back 2. I'd have wanted someone else in a trio of running backs there if I was going to put him in, which I've done in some of my other teams. Kareem Hunt, 14.5. Kareem Hunt is Kareem Hunt. He's going to get work out of the backfield. He gets work in the passing game. It's a good play really for the price, but you just can't guarantee consistency from him. And then, you've got Elijah Mitchell there as well at $8 million, but we assume Raheem Mostert is going to be fit and healthy. We didn't expect Trey Sermon to not suit up for that game, healthy scratch. So I still wouldn't change the way that I did that in the process. I still wouldn't have picked anyone different at running back, I don't think. Knowing what I know now, obviously I would have moved off him. But going into week 1 against Houston, it's just such a disappointing waste that he's only finished with 8.4. And I'm putting that solely on the Jacksonville coaching staff.
If you look at the sort of running backs of 40 million and below, and who scored, and you look at the sort of the top point scorers, I can't think there's anybody. Maybe Nyheim Hines, who scored 14.2, but everybody above him, nobody expected Mark Ingram to have 29 carries or whatever. You've already mentioned like Elijah Mitchell, the Williams and Gordon. Melvin Gordon got most of his points on one run. I don't think there's anybody there you would think to yourself, in hindsight, you could beat yourself up about, to be perfectly honest. I think, say, Nyheim Hines has been one of my favourites in best ball and stuff, so potentially I could have gone for him, and he does look like he's got a pretty good role in that offense. I'm just not sure how good that offense actually is. Yeah. There are clearly issues with having James Robinson, I think, and 36% of people are going to probably be questioning that, thinking about it. However, the nature of the NFL, for all we know, because of how that result went, they could become very run heavy this week. And, he's the lead back for it or something. But what's a bit worrying is Carlos Hyde actually got more carries, didn't he? It wasn't even like, one was, Robinson was on the ground and Carlos Hyde was through the air. He actually got more carries.
Yeah. What concerns me going into week 2 is they are coming up against Denver. And Denver did a pretty good job of completely shutting down any rushing offense that New York could throw at them, practically forcing New York to wear the ball out. So, I just don't like it going into week 2. From what I've seen, it just feels like the expectation is going to be put on Trevor Lawrence's shoulders. And like you said, I can't even hold on to the fact that James Robinson was the lead back, but just didn't perform in that week. He wasn't the lead back, certainly not in the carries anyway. So it won't come as a surprise that one of my potential plans this week is to just completely move off James Robinson. RIP on that experiment. The last thing, Mark, is around the defense. What can you say? When you look at all the defenses, the highest score was 16. Of the top 5, 2 of those teams in the top 5 scored 10. So there's not much between the Minnesota Vikings scoring 5 and the likes of San Francisco and Philadelphia scoring 10. Philadelphia practically kept Atlanta almost scoreless. So, I think it just shows that in this format, you're not going to get a big score from defense special teams unless they're completely going off for 1 week and taking balls to the house. Several interceptions, several sacks. The only thing I would maybe look at moving forward is if I did want to really free up that 0.5, if it was make or break in a transfer that I wanted to bring into my team. The Las Vegas Raiders defense looked pretty good last night against a very good team in Baltimore. They closed Lamar Jackson down. Mainly, I felt he was quite ineffective at times. They didn't even seem like they were blitzing much or providing much pressure. But they were still getting to Jackson. So that would be something that I would maybe look at moving forward, is if I needed that extra 0.5, as much as I don't want to burn a transfer on a defense, if I needed the extra 0.5, it's there to move off Minnesota onto a Las Vegas or a New York Jets.
I mean, I had Houston last week. They got 7 points. I know it was against the Jags, but it just goes to show how hard defenses are to call.
Yeah.
I mean, the Patriots a couple of years ago had a fantastic defense who did fantastically well in fantasy. But other than that, it's just completely random. And as we've said, in all the different formats of DFS we ever talk about is never pick a defense that stops you picking a player you want at another position.
Yeah. You did have your week 2 buy-in lineup up, Mark, a little bit prematurely.
Do I need to get it up again now?
Well, I think I want to see it again.
Okay, fine. Let's have a look. There you go. That's the one. Let's see. How's that one? Is that the right lineup this time? Yeah, that's better.
That's the one.
Okay, so you already alluded to this. So, I've slightly changed my philosophy on this. I was listening to some other pods, and there was a very valid point made about ceiling games. So when we talk about ceiling game, we're talking about a really high scoring game for a player, and that people pick their DFS teams like they used to pick their fantasy teams, as in try and get as much safe carries at the running back position, but actually running backs only get their ceiling games if they score touchdowns, is what the point they're making. Whereas receivers can get ceiling games of similar points, 30 points. Without doing that, they can just do that purely on receptions and yardage. And so thinking about that, this lineup, I've really, it's not I haven't spent money at running back but I'm not playing any of the really expensive running backs in this lineup. So I've got Mixon and Swift. Now, Swift isn't really just a reaction to the other day, because he was actually on the field for 63 snaps, which is 68%. And this is him coming off a week where he was in doubt, wasn't he? I think coming into the game if he was even going to play because of his fitness. So I think I think Detroit are going to be chasing. Obviously, we all expect that, but he got, I think it was 8 receptions. I think both him and Jamal Williams got 8 receptions, but Jamal Williams was only on the field for like a third of the snaps. So I feel his was more of an outlier. So yeah, Swift and Mixon are pretty good. Kyla Murray, we all know why he's good. We've already talked about him. There's no brainer. Hopkins and Tyreke Hill are pretty self-explanatory. Tim Patrick and Zach Pascal. Again, Tim Patrick is really a reaction to the Jerry Jeudy injury as much as anything. So even on Sunday, he still played 70% of the snaps, Tim Patrick. But now Jerry Jeudy's injured. I'm thinking that maybe he'll benefit a bit more than KJ Hamler. I mean, Noah Fant's another option who may well benefit as well from that. Zach Pascal was on the field for like 91% of snaps. So although his 2 touchdowns aren't sustainable, you can't score fantasy points if you're not on the field. So any wide receiver at 10 million who's on for 91% of the snaps, I think is a pretty good option. And then finally, I swallowed my pride and picked Darren Waller because
week 2 buy-in. And Mark has picked Darren Waller. Yes.
I even had TJ Hawkinson in there first of all, but then I had the money to at the end of it to sort of move up to Waller. And if he's going to be another wide receiver 1, then that's fine. So I think sort of there's less of what we called last week our premium players there. There's probably only 2, maybe 3 if you include Hopkins. But actually, I think for a game week 2 lineup, I'm pretty happy with that. Again, I've gone for the cheapest defense. It's Houston. It could be the Raiders. Could be whoever.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my game week 2 option. Completely different to my others.
I like it, Mark, and I like what you said about the running backs, because just shortly before the pod had started, when I was looking down the list at the wide receivers that had scored versus the list of running backs that had scored, on page 1, the lowest running back was Chase Edmonds at 14.6 for week 1. Pretty good score for a running back that's priced at 15. Not amazing, but not a bad score. When you look down the list at the wide receivers, the lowest on page 1 was Marquise Hollywood-Brown at 19.4. And Marquise Brown is in an offense where they don't throw the ball that much. Granted, he had 6 receptions in the game and he had a touchdown, but I think it just goes to show that when you actually look, you've got to get up to Dalvin Cook on the running backs list. And down to Cook, there is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Dalvin Cook is the 7th highest scoring running back this week, and that's the first running back to break 20. You can go all the way down the list to Zach Pascal, Jamar Chase, right at the bottom of page 1's wide receiver list. So if I was building a team again, I would probably be inclined to go down a similar kind of route, maybe, depending on how I was constructing my lineup. I do think McCaffrey still has a place, which he's in my lineup still. I still think he'll be one of the top fantasy scoring players in this format over the course of a season. But I absolutely love the 2. There's still 2 running back ones, but just reducing the cost a little bit there to then reinvest it back into the receiver core, as it were. And you've got Darren Waller there as well. Tyreek Hill and Hopkins speak for themselves.
I think so the point about Christian McCaffrey is he has the highest ceiling of any player, I think, in fantasy NFL. And they have, Alvin Kamara had a 6 touchdown game last year. We've seen McCaffrey averaging 35 points over a whole season and stuff. So They can. They have that potential for that really big ceiling, but I just think we're talking about consistency almost here across a whole season and stuff. And I think that I'm just happier to pay up a wide receiver. It's kind of, I think if that sort of penny had dropped and I'd heard that on a pod before we started the season, I might have constructed my pod team slightly differently.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of this. Get another go.
The good thing, like we said earlier in the pod about the week 2 buy-in, is you have got that information in week 2. You've not got it in week 1, or you've certainly not got as much information. And I think if you were to enter this in week 2 and look at the scoring, because you can see that the wide receivers, even just on page 1 of FanTeam when I look then, because you can see that the wide receivers have scored generally better across the board than the running backs, you'd be more inclined to then build a roster that gives you that potential to score from the wide receiver position. I mean, and you had 2 there, Mark, with Hopkins and Hill, who are 2 of the best scoring wide receivers that you could pick anyway. So I really like that. And you still had high upside, I think, in the running backs that you picked. I've gone a slightly different tact, Mark, with mine. Not massively different, but we'll see what you think of this. So I've gone with Kyla Murray at quarterback. No change there. I think he'll be one of the top 2 scoring quarterbacks over the season. I kept McCaffrey in because, like you said, I think of any of the fantasy players, he does have the highest ceiling. He was the highest scoring running back last week. Even though he is expensive, I do still like that flexibility there, that if I was starting this in week 2, if I've got the most expensive running back and one of the most expensive players in the game, I can move to anyone. I've then included Mixon for much the similar kind of reasons to you, Mark. What I was surprised about in week 1 with Joe Mixon was it's Cincinnati, though they did lead in that game, almost throwing it away. I was surprised at the amount of carries that Joe Mixon got, given it's his first competitive game back from injury from last season. And we do know that offense, it's so much better when he's involved in it. So yeah, I think Joe Mixon at 17, he's, for me, he's got that potential there to be one of the top 10 scoring running backs over the season. Tyson Williams, I've included him because I do like having an enabler in there. For me, if he's going to continue getting work like he did in week 1, and he was effective with the work that he got as well in terms of his yards per carry, I've absolutely no concerns about including him in there at $6 million because it just allows me to invest and spread the funds elsewhere in my team. For example, at receiver, I might have overlooked Antonio Brown a little bit. He had a great game. He almost looked like he was back to the Antonio Brown that we know, maybe not quite as dominant, but he has aged a little bit since. But he's clearly one of Tom Brady's favourite targets. He's almost edging Mike Evans out of the pecking order. So it seems like, to me, it's Godwin, Brown, and then Evans, but you can almost slot Gronkowski in there as well. So, I think if you're going to go for anyone in Tampa Bay, I think you've got to go with Godwin, Brown, or if you're going to go a little bit cheaper at tight end, you could maybe go Gronkowski, because we know that connection is there with Brady, though I wouldn't be inclined to go that way. CD Lamb, I think, is going to have a big season. I feel like we almost forgot about Amari Cooper a little bit. He had a top scoring week. Was he the top scoring wide receiver last week, Mark? I think he was.
Top scoring player, I think.
So I think we did neglect Amari Cooper a little bit, but I'm still expecting CD Lamb to have a big season, and there was a couple of balls that were thrown his way that on another week he catches them and he adds to his box score. So I think 16 mil, I think he will make a mockery of that price come the end of the year. I've included Adam Thielen because it's still quite evident to me that I feel, again, like Adam Thielen is someone that we've forgotten a little bit because there's so much hype around Justin Jefferson. Adam Thielen, it's still quite evident to me that when the Vikings get to the red zone, Adam Thielen seems to be the trusted target for Kirk Cousins. And he finishes the game with 9 receptions. He finishes the game with 92 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. You only have to look back on previous seasons on Adam Thielen's touchdowns. That isn't really an outlier. He's obviously not going to get you 2 touchdowns every week, but he's a constant red zone threat. His touchdown output's always high. And I think, again, at 16.5, he offers great value. He's going to finish the season with 1,000 receiving yards. He's going to finish the season probably with minimum 7 or 8 touchdowns. So he's going to be up there in the scoring again. And I think at 16.5, great option, especially if you want a bit of exposure to that Vikings offense, but you can't maybe afford Justin Jefferson in there. Yeah. Darren Waller speaks for himself. I think he will be one of the top 2 or 3 scoring tight ends again this season. And I think last night supported that from what we could see. Similar with you, Mark, on the defense. I've just gone with a cheap one at 9. I did like what I saw from the Raiders D. So, yeah, I've included them in there for that reason.
I think I really like the fact you've got Dallas and Tampa Bay exposure. That's really good. I think because there's some teams which are like they've almost continued where they left off. And I think that if you think about how Dallas were when Prescott was healthy last year, they were scoring so many points, scoring so many fantasy points. And Tampa Bay have just, as the season went on, they just got better and better. We know what Arizona are. You've got some got Minnesota there as well. So yeah, I think that's really great. The only thing which you need to work out is what you're doing about Tyson Williams if like Lev Bell or Devonta Freeman becomes active, and how you're gonna, because that money, what is he? Is he 6.5 or something really cheap like that?
6. He's one of the cheapest in the game.
He's 6. Yeah, there's not gonna. Yeah, I'm just trying to think what option. So that would be a 2 or 3 transfer job, I think, when you need to take him out. Yeah. So, but you never know. There might be some other what do you call value, come to light before that.
I think that's one of the reasons why I do like having a McCaffrey in there, because I think it's easy once you've got someone like McCaffrey, though he eats up 20 mil of your budget, McCaffrey quite easily becomes a 16 mil running back. Tyson Williams then quite easily becomes a 10 million wide receiver. So I think it's still, having someone like a McCaffrey in there still gives you the flexibility to move off Williams if that's something that I wanted to do. Because like you said, I'm wary of the fact that Lev Bell's there, not up to speed. I'm wary of the fact that Latavius Murray got some carries in that game as well. So yeah, I mean, he's in there as an enabler. I like having an enabler in my team, someone that's got upside. I'm not expecting stellar scoring each week out of a 6 mil running back, but is he going to get touches? Hopefully, if he keeps performing like he is, absolutely.
There's only 3 other players, 6 million, who scored any points, and they're single figures. So, yeah, that's like I say, you'll end up probably sacrificing McCaffrey, I suspect, when you have to move him. But as we were just discussing with the running back position, I don't think it's as clear cut as it used to be.
Yeah.
Sure. So
before we do move on, lastly, to our week 2 changes and strategy, Mark. If you're loving the stream on Twitter, hit the heart button. If you are watching the stream on YouTube or watching back, hit the like button. We appreciate any comments, whether it's during the show, any questions. We've had a lot of interaction with the community on Twitter over the past week. If anyone does have any questions whilst we are on the show, or after, if you're listening to this back on a pod, or after we've actually been live, find us on Twitter. I'm at Nick of Wigan. The listeners can find you, Mark, at where?
At _SMRF.
Awesome. And we're looking forward to your comments again and your questions this coming week.
And I've actually got a question from the FanTeam Discord. which we can look at later.
Yep. We'll move on to our week 2 preview then, Mark. So, is there any changes on the horizon for you in week 2?
No. Long and short is no. So
well, that is the short segment for you then.
So the obvious change. So my two sort of what I'd call gambles or weak spots, which you've already mentioned, are Tyler Conklin and Quez Watkins. But it's really it's really about, I don't see any other better options. So Juwan Johnson, the tight end of New Orleans, he's 8.5 million and he scored 17.1 points, which makes him easily the best value for money at that position. But he was only on the field for 12 snaps, of which 2 were touchdowns. And that doesn't feel to me like it's sustainable. Whereas Conklin was on for he had 71% of the snaps. And he did lose targets to KJ Osborne, who's actually a very cheap. I don't know what his price is at the moment, but I know he's a very cheap option for Minnesota.
Yeah, he is dirt cheap. He is he's 6.5.
Is he? Okay, so he is an option. He had 7 catches, but so he's definitely an option going forward before any price changes happen. But for this week, I'm just going to leave it as it is because I did quite well with the other parts of the team. So yeah, we will see. But yeah, I'm not going to change anything this week.
No changes. Interesting. Obviously, we saw last week, Mark, that things can change quite rapidly. So actually, when we were doing these team reveals last week, I had Gus Edwards in my team. Obviously, that didn't pan out the way that I was expecting because Gus Edwards tore his ACL. So what I would say is any transfers you're making, the deadline again is Thursday of this week. If you are going to make transfers, try and hold off as late as you possibly can so that you've got as much information to be able to make those transfers with confidence. You don't want to be leaving yourself in a position where you've already made transfers, someone gets injured in training or practice, and then you've left yourself either with no transfers or you're taking a hit. For that reason, Mark, I will not be making any transfers just yet. These are just proposed moves for me. So I mentioned earlier about moving off James Robinson. I am serious. I will be moving on from James Robinson this week. There's a nice yellow box that I've put around Chubb. That's my handiwork.
Very impressed.
Thank you very much. That is my handiwork. But yeah, I've put Chubb in there. For me, Nick Chubb is the purest running back in the league for me, Nick Chubb, in how he runs. He's like a running back's running back, almost like cut from the old school cloth. 15 carries last week, 83 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he also managed to haul in a couple of receptions as well, which you're not including a Nick Chubb in your lineup because you're expecting him to get a lot of work in the passing game. That is Kareem Hunt if you're looking for someone like that in that offense. But for me, 17.5, he was the lead back there last season, even though his actual snap count is usually around the 60% mark. He's so efficient with the snaps that he does get. And I think if he's going to continue getting the work that he did this past week, especially goal line work as well, I'm quite happy to have him in my team. There's a couple of other running backs around that sort of price bracket at 17 mil, 17.5, who I would not mind owning, the likes of Joe Mixon, the likes of Swift, even David Montgomery. Despite the Bears getting spanked by the Rams, I was actually quite surprised and impressed almost by David Montgomery. Of anyone who, David Montgomery's had his detractors. He's had his detractors in 5-yard rush. He had a good end to last season, and he looked like he picked up where he left off against the Rams. We've got a pretty good defense, and he was still quite effective against us running the ball. So I would consider that move as well. One thing I do like about Nick Chubb, Mark, and I think this is important when you're looking at a season-long contest, is the games that he's got coming up. So home to the Texans, home to the Bears, on the road to the Vikings, on the road to the Chargers. Texans, despite Jacksonville not really running the ball that much last week, Texans were one of the worst running defenses last year. I don't think they've drastically improved that. And I think that's something that Jacksonville didn't exploit last week. As for the Chicago Bears, Darrell Henderson didn't look fantastic, but was still able to average 4.4 yards per carry. And Joe Mixon carved up the Vikings' run defense. So for certainly these next few games, I quite like what I see there. And that's one of the reasons why I'm considering getting Nick Chubb in my lineup. Before I move on to my next transfer, Mark, have you any thoughts on Nick Chubb?
Well, there's so many great options around that 17 million, isn't there? You can make a case for Nick Chubb, especially against Houston. But I can make a great case for Eckler, because he's getting goal line work as well. And I think that game, the Chargers-Washington game, actually was quite low scoring. But actually, I think those two teams are going to beat a lot of teams this year. So I suspect that there's more fantasy points to come out of Eckler. And obviously, we both like Joe Mixon as well. But yeah, Chubb's fine. I had the same thing last week, and I just got lucky in the fact I chose Mixon. Is depending on the day of the week, that 17.5 million pound running back could be anybody for me. It really is. I just find that I think it's such a great price bracket. I'm just having a look as well. Aaron Jones isn't going to be. He's up against Detroit, and he's not going to be as bad as he was this week. Najee Harris was on the field for 100% of the snaps, for example. I know the Steelers didn't look particularly good, but they're going to go up against the Raiders next. So, there's another great option. I think Antonio Gibson is going to be a good option this week against the Giants as well, who, just let Melvin Gordon run for 7, gain 20 points on them. So, yeah, I think there's lots of options there. I really do. So, I mean, I'm not saying Chubb's a bad option. I'm just saying I'm glad I don't have to make that decision this week.
Yeah, and that's the only thing I think that's holding me back, other than the fact that we know that injuries can happen in practice. It's that that's the way I'm going right now, Mark. If I do decide to go that, I'd say I'm probably 70% on Nick Chubb as it stands at the moment, which is why I'm included him in this part of the transfer plans, if you will.
5% as well. Ownership is just fantastic for somebody who could be the rushing leader.
Yeah. My next move is one I don't really want to make, but one that I have to make to facilitate Nick Chubb, and that would be moving on from DeAndre Hopkins, which seems absolutely insane after the week that DeAndre Hopkins has just had. But there is a little bit of method there in my madness, Mark. I feel like having DeAndre Hopkins and Kyla Murray week 1, we said that we weren't really going to stack. I feel like that did work in week 1. However, I did say to you that I would probably be off DeAndre Hopkins come week 4, because he's then got the Rams on the road, the Niners at home, and then the Browns on the road. He's got the Vikings this week, and I suspect that we're going to get another good score from DeAndre Hopkins. The only reason I've removed DeAndre Hopkins is I'm probably slightly more confident in Stephon Diggs this week, if I'm honest. I think Diggs was targeted more of the two, and Diggs is on the road at Miami, who do have a pretty good secondary. But New England with makeshift receivers, an offense that's basically spare parts that's been glued together this season, was seemingly able to carve through Miami's defense at times. Josh Allen's a better quarterback than Mac Jones. Stephon Diggs is better than anything that Miami came up against last week. So I think for me, it's more if I'm looking at Diggs still put up a respectable score, but he's capable of a lot more. The following week, he has the Washington football team at home, and then he has the Houston Texans at home. So I'm expecting big scores from Stephon Diggs over the next few weeks. So it's with a heavy heart that if I had to get rid of someone, it would unfortunately have to be Hopkins. Twofold, Mark, as I said to you, he'd probably be gone by week 4 for me anyway. And the second one is I don't want to keep the stack for too long if I'm going to make these moves, because I'm conscious that I'm going to have to contend with bye weeks at some point as well. And I don't like the idea of pre-planning transfers in for that. If it's something where I can move off a Hopkins and potentially move on to him again at some point in the season when I like his schedule clearing up a little bit more, then that's what I will do. But he is a necessary casualty to rid my team of the James Robinson disease, unfortunately.
It's a tough decision, isn't it? And I think this is symptomatic of the decisions we're all going to have to make at some point during the season. The thing about Antonio Brown is, I think I said it in the 5 Yard Rush WhatsApp and stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being the best out of all the receivers in Tampa Bay, fantasy-wise.
That's what's cushioning the loss a little bit for me. So if I was taking out DeAndre Hopkins, the fact that I'm bringing in an Antonio Brown, I was against what you were saying, Mark. I didn't think he would be one of the top receivers there, but he did look like the Antonio Brown of old. What we saw against Dallas, and that's a good team in Dallas who they've come up against there as well. So yeah, it does cushion the blow a little bit for me. I really don't want to lose DeAndre Hopkins, but unfortunately, these are the kind of moves that you've got to make to be able to facilitate other players in the lineup. It is what it is, kind of thing. And the Bucs are on the road to the Falcons this week, and I think if I was to make a move and it's going to pay off within a week, I think it's going to pay off in that way. I don't think the Falcons are anything to worry about there.
No, I think the other thing side of this as well is, as much as it sounded like we were sort of dissing running backs, you can't go much lower than 17 or 16.5 for your running backs, really, if you want a couple of decent ones. Even on my game week 2 team, where I'm sort of not prioritizing it, it's still, was it 17 million or whatever is the lowest price. So, you can't avoid it. You still need to have, because of the way the pricing is on FanTeam, you just need to have spend some money on it.
Yeah.
And I think DeAndre Swift at 16 is kind of the lowest. Yeah, definitely 100%. It's the lowest you would go for a sort of a starting running back, for want of a better phrase. Everything below that is a bit more timeshare or an RB2 for a team. So
yeah.
So you can't really avoid that, and you can't buy everybody. So yeah, but I think Brown is a great option.
Yeah,
really do.
Other than that, I'm quite happy with the lineup next week, Mark. I know one of the questions we've had from Rich at Dynasty Island has said, any thoughts to moving off Callaway? Like we mentioned earlier in the pod, Mark, I'm happy to give him another week, even though he disappointed in week 1. I'm more than happy to give him another week against Carolina, see how things go there, and if all else fails, one thing that I really like about this format is you get them 2 free transfers every game week. So if it then came to moving off Callaway next week, it could be a case of, do I downgrade a Christian McCaffrey slightly? Does Deebo Samuel stay fit and healthy for another week? Does he come into my thoughts? There's receivers down there at that 15 million bracket. 15, 16 million, where I could downgrade McCaffrey to still a very good running back and managed to upgrade Callaway to a receiver who I might have a little bit more confidence in going forward. So them 2 transfers are really going to help me out there. But in answer to your question, Rich, I'm certainly not moving off Callaway this week, I don't think. I'll give him this week. But there's got to be a performance this week.
Yeah, I agree. He's on a short leash, but yeah, I think so. I'm also interested if Tre'Quan Smith comes back as well. I think beforehand, actually, Rich and me had a brief discussion beforehand about this. I think I was always more tempted to play Tre'Quan if he was fit, just as much as an ownership thing. But he's. I think you give him one more week if you've got him in there, but no more than that. Or you don't. I've got a question from the FanTeam Discord from Marmalade Forest, which I doubt is his christening name, but he says, "Does Mostert being injured make Kittle or another 49ers running back wide receiver more tempting?" I don't think Kittle wasn't great week 1, was he? And I know Deebo Samuel took most of the receiving yards from everybody, but Kittle's a bit of a boom and bust player as well, I think, at the tight end position. So
I think there's 2 players in the San Francisco offense. When you look at the next gen stats, they always rank highly on yards after catch, and that's Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. So even though Kittle didn't have a big week receiving wise, when you compare him with Deebo Samuel, 78 yards, 4 receptions is probably still the upper echelon of most tight ends most weeks, and you're going to get your weeks from Kittle where he will go off for 100 plus yards. He's going to get his touchdowns. Does it make anyone else more appealing? I like the appeal of Deebo Samuel. I really like the appeal of Brandon Ayuk, but where was Brandon Ayuk on Sunday? Was he carrying a knock? I mean, no targets. What happened?
It was such a surprise because he's one of those players in the off season who's been sort of pumped up, hasn't he, in the fantasy circles? And Deebo Samuel kind of got forgotten about a bit.
Yeah,
and I think Kittle and Samuel are probably at the moment the only 2 options. You don't think anybody wants to touch the running back situation at the moment. You just don't know what's going to be happening there. It changes. I'm sure it changes from week to week as well. It was Elijah Mitchell this week, but it might be next week. Shanahan seems to put a lot of sort of weight and credence into how practice goes and things like that. So maybe more so than some other coaches. So yeah. I just I'm not a big Kittle fan for fantasy. I think he's a great player to watch in real life, as it were, but I'm not a great fantasy fan of Kittle. So, and he is the second most expensive tight end in here. So
yeah, I think the thing with Kittle is he probably is the best tight end in the league because he can do both very well. He's a good receiving tight end. He's a very good blocking tight end. But I'm with you, Mark. He's probably still top 3 for tight end because it's a shallow position. But I would be more inclined, if I'm spending that money, to just jump on Darren Waller, who we know is wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas. In terms of the running backs, you look down the list of running backs in San Francisco: Elijah Mitchell, Jermichael Hasty. Obviously, we know Mostert now is out for this season. Trey Sermon and Jeff Wilson. And you look at some of those names, Jermichael Hasty, Jeff Wilson, we know those names from last season. They do pop up. They do grab touchdowns. They will have big weeks. We don't know when those weeks are going to be. I'm sure Elijah Mitchell will have another week where he's the lead back. We don't know when that week's going to be. Trey Sermon, he might decide to put his pads on this week. He might get given the nod. So you've got to factor that in as well. I don't think Mostert going down makes any of the San Francisco running backs any more appealing than they already
No.
were or weren't, as it were, because we know it's a committee backfield all the time in San Francisco. So it's almost next man up. If Mostert goes down, they'll give it to the hot hand. It just so happens the hot hand this week was Elijah Mitchell. So, yeah, for me, it just increases the appeal of Deebo Samuel, who we know has had his injury history problems in the past. If he stays healthy, I think at 15 mil, because of the fact that he's a massive yards after catch receiver, and because he does also factor in the backfield as well on some sweeps and things like that, I think he's definitely a really good price at 15. Kittle, we've already covered that. And for me, Mark, the other thing I've got behind, Trent Sheffield at 6.5. Sheffield 6.5.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to keep an enabler in your team, the likes of a Tyson Williams or a Quez Watkins, if he's going to churn out 10 points for you every week, man, I'll take that at 6.5. I've definitely got. I mean, he only had 2 receptions for 23 yards and a touchdown, but I think that's a wait and see really on the San Francisco offense.
Yeah, he was on the field as much as he was on the same field. I mean, as much as Brandon Ayuk, and he also more than Mohamed Sanu. So yeah, he seems to be trending the right way. There's something about these Shanahan offices over fantasy which just don't seem to go together, do they? Because week to week is so different. A little bit like Bill Belichick.
Variable.
Yeah, a little bit like Bill Belichick and his running backs. And I think that you can use that to your advantage on regular weekly DFS, but for a contest like this, I just think there's better options. I mean, Mostert hadn't got injured, he would have been a perfect pivot from James Robinson because they're both the same price. But that is a dead zone now. That is a dead zone from 16 million downwards. So
I was going to say, if you're moving off Mostert, a prime candidate to take up the role in your team is James Robinson at 14 mil.
Yeah, no exactly. And I mean, it really is, I mean, I suppose the best option, Damian Harris, looked pretty good on the eye. He only got 11 points, but he's about it there, really. Yeah, it's the other one is Mike Davis didn't do anything for Atlanta, but he was on the field for almost every snap, I think.
Yeah.
So 75% of the snaps. So he's another one right there. But yeah, it really is a dead zone. It really is. So that was a great question.
Was there any other questions, Mark, or does that round us off nicely?
I think that's all of our questions.
Thanks very much. There is one thing I wanted to just bring your attention to before we do sign off, Mark. So if anyone listened to the first pod that we did last week, in fact, the strategy pod, we did not have a sign off tagline. Now, I have had a suggestion from 5 Yards own Andy Pitsy.
I'm looking forward to this because I don't know what this is. Nick's just told me it's going to be great. He hasn't told me what it is.
It is awful. It is too cheesy. It is dreadful, but he claims it is a winner. So, before we sign this pod off with Pitsy's words of wisdom, hit us up on the socials. Remember, your team will lock on Thursday evening. You can find me at Nick of Wigan. You can find Mark at _SMRF, and you can find us both at 5 Yard Rush. Any questions you have, any comments, we will be interacting with people before the deadline and thereafter. Anything that you want to add, Mark, before I sign this off?
I mean, we really love your questions. We had really great interactions and sort of chats with people after last week's pod, which is fantastic. And just keep asking. Anything we do, we can't predict the future. Also, that about fantasy sports, we can't predict the future. But we've been doing this stuff for a long time, and And also, we actually had a tweet today from somebody who listened to our pod last week. Said he wasn't really big into NFL and outscored us last week. So from listening to our pod, so that's nice stroke annoying. So
that might be a typical example of us not heeding our own advice, Mark, and just going against our better natures. But yeah, if we do manage to help anyone in any way with this, it is new to us as well, this contest. But like you said, Mark, we've got a lot of experience in talking fantasy NFL, playing DFS. So if we're able to help anyone at all, fantastic. Hit us up on Twitter, get your questions in. We will be back the same time next week. Drum roll to sign the show off. Oh, dear me.
Yeah, go on, you can do it.
Believe me, if anyone has any better suggestions, please fire them over, because I'm not sure this one's going to stick. But courtesy of Pitsy, 5 Yard Zone, Pitsy, don't just be a fan of your team, create a fan team.
No words.
We will see you again next week.